I did not quit my job because I was weak. I quit because something inside me finally went quiet. The day my father looked at me and said my brothers deserved 3 times my salary, I felt smaller than I ever had before. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where he once helped me with homework. His voice was calm, almost reasonable. That hurt the most. I remember nodding, pretending to understand, while my chest felt heavy. I told myself it was just business. I told myself families are complicated. But deep down, I knew this was not about money. It was about value, about who mattered more. That night, rain tapped softly on my window. I stared at my resignation letter and whispered, "If I stay, I will disappear." So I chose to leave. I hoped someday he would understand the silence he created then. I grew up believing my family was simple and strong. My father built everything with his own hands. He started a small business when I was a child, and our home often smelled like paper, coffee, and long workdays. My brothers and I learned early that work was not just a choice, it was duty. I was the youngest. I watched more than I spoke. While my brothers followed my father into meetings and job sites, I stayed closer to home. I helped my mother, studied hard, and told myself there'd be time for me later. My father used to smile at me and say, "You're smart, you'll be fine." I held on to those words for years. When I joined the family business, it felt like coming home. The office was small, the walls were plain, but I felt proud sitting at my desk. I worked hard. I came early and left late. I did not complain. I believed effort would speak for itself. At dinner, my brothers talked about growth and profits. I listened quietly. My father nodded at them with approval. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if he noticed my work too. I brushed that thought away. Families don't keep score, I told myself. We support each other. That belief kept me calm for a long time. Over time, I became the one people depended on. Clients called me when there were problems. Staff came to me when things fell apart. I felt useful, even invisible. I told myself that being needed was enough. Praise was not necessary. Fairness would come naturally. My brothers were confident. They spoke loudly. They disagreed openly with my father. I admired that about them. I did not have their courage. I thought respect meant silence and patience. My father often said, "They have leadership energy." I nodded again, even when my chest felt tight. At home, my mother noticed my tired eyes. She would pour me tea and say, "You're doing well." Her words were gentle, but they felt small compared to the quiet ache inside me. Still, I stayed. I believed families change slowly. Money was never discussed openly. Salaries felt like a private thing. I assumed we were all treated fairly. Why wouldn't we be? We shared blood. We shared history. I trusted that. Looking back, I see the signs I ignored. The missed acknowledgments, the meetings I wasn't invited to, the decisions were made without me. At the time, I called it coincidence. I told myself patience was strength. I did not know yet how expensive that belief would become. The tension did not arrive all at once. It slipped in quietly, like dust settling on furniture no one touched anymore. At first, it was small things. A meeting was scheduled without my name on the calendar, a decision announced after it was already made. I would pause, look at my screen, and tell myself it was nothing. One afternoon, I overheard my brothers talking in the hallway. They stopped when they saw me. One of them smiled and said, "We'll fill you in later." His voice was kind, but something felt off. Later never came. I sat at my desk, listening to the hum of the office, feeling a strange emptiness. At home, I replayed moments in my head. Maybe I wasn't assertive enough. Maybe I should speak more. Then another voice inside me whispered, "Why should I have to fight to be seen in my own family?" That thought scared me, so I pushed it away. A few weeks later, my father praised my brother during dinner. "He handled that deal well," he said proudly. I waited, hoping he might mention the hours I spent fixing the problems behind the scenes. He didn't. My fork froze midair. I swallowed my disappointment along with my food. I tried to talk to myself gently. Stay calm. Don't make this heavy. I believed harmony was fragile. If I spoke up, I might break something that could never be fixed. So I stayed quiet. One evening, my mother asked, "Are you happy at work?" I hesitated. The room felt too still. "Yes," I answered, even though the word felt thin. She looked at me for a long moment, but didn't push. At the office, my responsibilities grew, but my voice shrank. I started arriving earlier, leaving later, hoping effort would close the distance I felt. Instead, the gap widened. I noticed how easily my brother's opinions were accepted, how quickly my suggestions were redirected. I wasn't angry, I was confused. I felt like I was slowly fading from a picture I once belonged to, and no one seemed to notice. That realization sat quietly with me, heavy and unresolved. The first time I noticed the pay difference was by accident. I was organizing some old files late one evening when a document slipped out of a folder. It listed salaries. I stared at the numbers, certain I was misunderstanding. I checked again, then again. My brothers were earning far more than I was, almost 3 times. My hands trembled as I placed the paper back where it belonged. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying conversations, trying to see where I had missed something. Did I ever ask? Did I ever say I wanted more? The questions circled my mind, refusing to rest. A few days later, I worked up the courage to speak to my father. We stood in the kitchen, just the two of us. The smell of soup filled the room. I chose my words carefully. "I saw something that confused me," I said softly, "about salaries." He looked at me, calm and steady. "Your brothers bring in more value," he replied. "They handle bigger decisions." I nodded slowly, even though my chest tightened. "I work hard too," I said. My voice barely held. He sighed, not unkindly. "This is how business works," he said. "Don't take it personally." But I did. Not loudly, not angrily. I took it deep inside, where it settled like a stone. I realized then that my effort had been invisible for a long time. After that conversation, something shifted. I still did my work, but the warmth was gone. I noticed how my father defended my brothers without hesitation, how my doubts were met with explanations instead of understanding. I began to feel like a guest in a place I once called home. Every task felt heavier, every smile felt practiced. I wasn't building resentment, I was building clarity, and that clarity scared me more than anger ever could. After that talk, I started noticing everything I had trained myself to ignore. The patterns became clear. My brothers spoke, and the room leaned toward them. I spoke, and the room stayed still. No one was cruel, no one raised their voice. That made it harder. There was nothing obvious to point at, just a quiet imbalance that followed me everywhere. I tried to change. I spoke up more in meetings. I shared ideas with confidence I had practiced in the mirror. My father listened, then turned to my brothers and asked what they thought. They often repeated my ideas in different words. He nodded at them. "That's smart," he would say. I felt my face warm, but I stayed silent. At home, I grew tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. I would sit alone at night listening to the house breathe. I asked myself hard questions. If this were not my family, would I stay? If someone else treated me this way, what would I advise them to do? The answers scared me. One evening, my father asked me to take on more responsibility. He said, "We need you." His words should have felt good. Instead, they felt hollow. Need without recognition began to feel like a burden. I looked at him and almost said something. I almost asked if my value would ever match my effort, but the words stayed trapped in my throat. I realized then that I was waiting for permission to matter, and that permission might never come. The office felt colder after that. The walls seemed closer. I caught my reflection in the glass one morning and barely recognized myself. I looked carefully. Smaller. I wasn't angry. I wasn't planning revenge. I was grieving something, quietly. The belief that fairness would come on its own. The belief that love always protects. That grief made one thing clear. Staying was teaching me to disappear, and leaving, though painful, was starting to feel like the only honest choice left to me. The moment did not explode. It unfolded, slowly, like a long breath I had been holding without realizing it. My father called a meeting one morning. Just family, no staff, no clients. The room felt tight, even before anyone spoke. He stood at the head of the table, papers in his hands. He talked about restructuring, about growth, about rewarding those who carried the company forward. I listened carefully, already sensing where this was going. My brothers nodded along, confident and relaxed. Then the numbers came up. New compensation plans, new titles. My brothers' roles expanded, their pay rising even higher. When he finished, my father looked at me and said, "Your role stays the same. This is fair." Fair. The word echoed inside me. I asked, quietly, "Can you help me understand why?" He didn't hesitate. "They take bigger risks," he said. "They think like leaders. You support. That's valuable too." Support. The room felt very quiet after that. I noticed how easily the word left his mouth, how settled he seemed in that judgment. I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, not a shock, just a deep, steady clarity. I realized he wasn't explaining a system, he was explaining how he saw me. I looked at my brothers. They avoided my eyes. Maybe they were uncomfortable. Maybe they were relieved. I didn't blame them. This wasn't about them anymore. "I see," I said. My voice was calm. I surprised myself. The meeting ended quickly after that. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Everyone returned to their day as if nothing had happened. I stayed seated for a moment, staring at the empty chair across from me. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop and stared at a blank document. I didn't type right away. I thought about the years I had given, the silence I had mistaken for peace, the patience I had called strength. For the first time, I didn't ask what my family needed. I asked what I needed. And the answer came gently, but firmly. I needed to leave. I wrote my resignation slowly, as if each word needed permission to exist. My hands were steady, but my heart felt tender. I did not blame anyone in the letter. I did not explain everything. I simply said I was stepping away to find my own path. When I finished, I read it twice, then closed the laptop. I waited until evening to speak to my father. He was in the living room, reading. The lamp beside him cast a soft yellow light. For a moment, I almost changed my mind. Habit is powerful. Silence is familiar. But I sat down across from him. "I've decided to leave the company," I said. He looked up, surprised, but not alarmed. "Leave?" he repeated. "Why would you do that?" I placed the paper on the table between us. "Because staying is costing me more than I can afford," I said. My voice was quiet, but clear. He picked up the paper and scanned it. His brow tightened slightly. "You're being emotional. This is business. We can talk about adjustments later." I shook my head. "This isn't about numbers anymore. It's about how I'm seen." He leaned back, exhaling. "You're overthinking," he said. "Your brothers earned what they get. You should be proud of them." "I am," I said, "but I need to be proud of myself, too." That's when something changed in his expression. Not fully, just enough. He studied my face as if seeing it for the first time. The room felt very still. "You'd really walk away?" he asked. I nodded. My throat felt tight, but I didn't look away. "Yes." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just sat there, silent. The space between us felt wider than the room itself. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I expected fear, regret, doubt. Instead, I felt a quiet relief. Sadness was there too, heavy and honest. But beneath it, there was something new. Respect. For myself. The next morning felt different. Not dramatic, just still. I woke up before the alarm and lay there listening to the quiet house. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing towards anything. That scared me, but it also felt clean. When I arrived at the office, my father was already there. He looked tired, older somehow. He asked me to step into his office. The door closed softly behind us. I didn't sleep much. His voice was lower than usual. I kept thinking about what you said. I nodded, unsure what to expect. I always thought you were steady, he continued. I thought you didn't need much. Your brothers always asked, always pushed. I assumed silence meant comfort. I felt my chest tighten. Silence meant I was trying to belong, I said gently. He looked down at his desk. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked quietly. Then he sighed. I may have been wrong, he admitted. The words sounded heavy in his mouth. He offered to reconsider, to adjust my role, to raise my pay. He said it quickly, like someone afraid of missing a chance. I listened carefully. I believed he meant it, but something had already shifted inside me. I appreciate that, I said, but I didn't leave for more money. I left because I learned what staying was teaching me about myself. His eyes softened. Regret finally reached his face. Not loud, not dramatic, just real. I never wanted to hurt you, he said. I know, I replied, but it still happened. We sat there, sharing a quiet understanding that came too late. When I stood to leave, he reached out, then stopped himself. I walked out of the office slowly, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. Outside, the air felt cool, honest. I took a deep breath and realized something important. Sometimes regret doesn't come from losing someone. It comes from realizing too late what they were worth. Leaving the company did not mean leaving my family behind, but it changed the way we moved around each other. The days after my resignation were quiet. No arguments, no dramatic conversations, just space. Space can be painful, but it can also be honest. At home, I noticed my father watching me differently, as if he were measuring the absence I left behind. He didn't ask for help with work anymore. He didn't bring up business at dinner. The silence between us felt heavier than before. But it wasn't empty. It was full of things we hadn't said. I spent my mornings walking instead of rushing. I let myself feel the sadness without pushing it away. Some days I missed the routine. Other days I felt light, almost surprised by my own calm. I reminded myself that healing is not loud. My brothers kept their distance at first. One of them eventually sat beside me on the porch. I didn't know, he said quietly. I believed him. I nodded and we let the conversation rest there. Blame would not bring anything back. My mother hugged me longer than usual. She didn't ask questions, she didn't offer advice. Her arms said enough. At that moment, I realized how tired I had been of proving myself. Slowly, my father began to speak again. Not about work, about small things. Weather, old memories. One evening, he said, "The office feels strange without you." His voice carried something close to apology. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was learning to listen without shrinking. Leaving taught me something important. My worth didn't disappear when I stepped away. It grew clearer. And even though the future felt uncertain, it felt honest. That honesty became my anchor. Time softened the sharp edges of everything. Weeks passed, then months. I found work outside the family business. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I was nervous on my first day, sitting at a new desk surrounded by unfamiliar faces. Still, when someone asked my opinion, they listened. That felt strange at first. Then it felt healing. At home, my father grew quieter. Not distant, just thoughtful. I could see him noticing things he once overlooked. How often I had helped without being asked. How rarely I had asked for anything in return. Regret doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it settles slowly, like evening light. One night, he knocked on my door. He held an old photo of the three of us as children. "You always stood in the middle," he said softly. His voice trembled just enough. I took the photo from his hands. "I didn't know how to ask for more," I replied. "I didn't know how to see it," he said. That was the closest we came to forgiveness that night. It was enough. My brothers began treating me differently too. They asked how I was doing. They listened without rushing to speak. The imbalance hadn't vanished, but awareness had entered the room, and awareness changes things. I stopped measuring myself against them. Their path was theirs. Mine was opening in a new direction. I felt stronger, not because I had won, but because I had chosen myself without burning everything behind me. Some evenings I still felt a familiar ache. No regret. Memory. I learned to let it pass without judgment. Growth often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. Leaving did not break my family. It changed it. And change, I learned, is not always the enemy. Sometimes it's the beginning of a quieter, truer connection. With time, the tension that once lived between us began to loosen. Not completely, but enough to breathe. My father no longer spoke with certainty when he talked about the past. He asked more questions. He paused before answering. Those pauses mattered. One afternoon, we sat together at the same kitchen table where everything had started. Sunlight fell across the surface, soft and forgiving. He traced a small mark in the wood and said, "I built that company to provide. I didn't realize I was taking something away." I listened. I didn't rush him. "I stayed because I loved you. I left because I needed to love myself too." He nodded slowly. His eyes were wet, but his voice stayed calm. "I wish I had understood sooner," he said. "I know," I replied, and I meant it. We didn't try to rewrite the past. We let it be what it was. That acceptance felt like a quiet victory. I grew into my new life gently. I trusted my voice more. I stopped waiting for permission. Each small choice built something steady inside me. Confidence doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes as peace. My family dinners became simpler. Laughter returned, careful at first, then easier. The old roles softened. I was no longer the silent one. I was just myself. Looking back, I see how leaving created space for truth, not just for me, but for everyone. My father's regret didn't fix everything, but it opened a door, and I chose to step through it with grace, not bitterness. Some lessons come late. That doesn't make them useless. It makes them earn. Now, when I think about that chapter of my life, I no longer feel the tightness in my chest. I feel understanding. I see a younger version of myself trying to earn love through patience and effort. I don't blame that version. They were doing the best they knew how. My father and I talk differently now, not as employee and employer, just as two people are learning each other again. Sometimes he shares stories about his fears back then, about carrying responsibility without knowing how to show care. I listen without judgment. We are both still learning. I've learned that loyalty should not require silence, that fairness doesn't arrive on its own. It needs a voice. It takes courage. Walking away was not an act of anger, it was an act of honesty. There are moments when I still miss the old familiarity, the shared routines, the sense of belonging, but I no longer confuse comfort with worth. I know now that my value doesn't depend on comparison or approval. When I sit quietly in the evening, I feel something steady inside me, a quiet strength, the kind that comes from choosing yourself without closing your heart to others. That balance took time. It still does. This experience didn't harden me, it softened me in the right places. It taught me to speak gently, but clearly, to stand without pushing, and to leave when staying costs too much of who you are. If there is one lesson I carry forward, It is this: love and fairness are not the same, but both matter. You can love deeply and still be overlooked. You can work hard and still be unseen. That truth is painful, but it is also freeing once you accept it. I no longer wait for someone else to decide my worth. I no longer stay quiet to keep the peace. Peace that costs your voice is not peace at all. Real peace feels calm, but it also feels honest. My father's regret came quietly, not in grand apologies or dramatic gestures, just changed behavior. In softer words, listening. That was enough. Forgiveness doesn't always need a ceremony. Sometimes it just needs time and willingness. To anyone listening who feels small in their own family, their own work, or their own life, I want you to know this. Leaving does not mean you failed. Sometimes leaving is how you finally succeed, not in money or status, but in self-respect. You deserve to be seen without shrinking, to be valued without explanation, to belong without conditions. I walked away from something familiar to find something truer, and in doing so, I found my voice, my balance, and a deeper kind of peace. If this story offers you anything, let it